Welcome back, everyone, to the Seniors Confessions channel. My husband announced he was about to sign a $20 billion contract. That night, I overheard him on the phone. "Don't worry, boss, you can sleep with my wife tomorrow night." I took immediate action that shattered everything. There are things that happen right under your own roof that, if I hadn't seen them with my own eyes, I would never have believed. That night, the night my husband announced he was about to sign a $20 billion contract. It was also the night I realized some people are willing to trade anything, even their own wife's honor, just to climb a ladder they perceive as success. My name is Nok Thao, and I am 32 years old. I work as a dance teacher for children at a small arts center. It sounds light and easy, but it is actually very demanding. I have to maintain my figure, my health, and my spirit so I can always be full of energy for the kids. People often joke that in this profession, you must always look beautiful and polished, because if you are even a little sluggish, the students will sense it immediately. Perhaps that is why I take good care of myself, not to compete with anyone, but simply to do the job I chose well. My husband, Van Hung, works at a medium-sized construction company. Our life as a couple has never been wealthy, but we haven't been in need either. I always thought that as long as we both worked hard and saved bit by bit, we would eventually have a stable home and a cute child. That was enough. I have no grand ambitions, just a desire for a peaceful life. But perhaps I was just too naive. That afternoon, when I got home from class, still sweating from teaching the kids, I saw Hung waiting at the door. The moment he saw me, he gave a very bright smile, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in a very long time. He pulled me into the house, his voice full of excitement. "Thou, this time I'm really going to change my life. A $20 billion contract." I froze for a few seconds. 20 billion. For my family, that is no longer a normal number. But instead of feeling happy right away, a strange feeling welled up inside me. I asked him back, trying to keep my voice calm. "What kind of contract is that big? Your company has never handled a project of that scale before." Hung hesitated for a beat, then quickly laughed it off and patted my shoulder. "You don't understand, this time I've got big bosses backing me. As long as I know how to play the game, it's all set." The words "play the game" came out so lightly, yet they made me inexplicably uneasy. I intended to ask more, but Hung turned away as if he didn't want to go deeper. Right at that moment, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Twee, stepped out of her room. Hearing snippets about 20 billion, her attitude changed instantly. She had always criticized Hung for being incompetent, but now she was beaming with joy. "See, I told you, once my son catches a break, no one can match him. Our life is going to be different now." She began talking incessantly about moving houses, buying a car, and renovating the living room to befit their status. Then she even planned to invite all our relatives over to celebrate. Seeing how excited she was, I suddenly felt like it was all a bit much. Everything was just about to be signed, yet she acted as if it were all already firmly in their hands. That evening, Hung took the initiative to buy all sorts of things, from expensive food to a bottle of wine I'd never seen him dare to buy before. He kept pouring drinks, laughing and talking loudly, as if he had become a completely different person. During the meal, he looked at me for a moment and said, "From now on, you don't need to teach anymore. Just stay home, I'll take care of everything." I put down my chopsticks and looked straight at him. That statement might sound like a sweet promise to many, but to me, it felt unsettling. I asked back, "I'm doing well in my job, why would I have to quit?" Hung gave a faint smile, his voice carrying a touch of disdain I had never seen before. "Are you saying that because you want to spare me from hardship, or because you're so used to working that you can't handle a life of comfort?" That remark was like a small needle pricking my heart. It didn't sting sharply, but it was enough for me to realize that something was changing. The man in front of me no longer resembles the husband I once knew. The meal ended in a strange atmosphere. My mother-in-law kept laughing and talking. Hung drank glass after glass, while I could barely swallow another bite. I just quietly cleaned up and went to the room first. That night, I lay in bed unable to sleep. Hung's words kept swirling in my head. "Just be a little more sensible." I didn't understand what "sensible" meant here, but a clear sense of unease rose within me. I turned to look at Hung lying next to me. The nightlight cast a glow on his face. It was still that familiar face, yet it felt strangely foreign. Some invisible distance had just appeared between us, and I didn't even know when it began. At the time, I simply thought perhaps he was just excited about the big opportunity and changed a little. I reassured myself with that thought. But I never expected that the 20 billion opportunity would be what pushed my marriage to a brink I never imagined. And I never expected that that very night, just a few hours later, I would overhear a phone call that shattered everything I had believed in for years. I lay there wide awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind in a tangled mess. Outside the window, the night was already deep. The alley in front of the house was quieter than usual, with only the sound of distant barking and the occasional motorbike speeding past. I don't know when I dozed off, but around 1 a.m., I jolted awake when I reflexively reached out and didn't feel hung. The other side of the bed was empty, the blanket still slightly rumpled, as if he had just left, and my heart suddenly skipped a beat. On a normal day, I would probably just think my husband went to get water or to the restroom. But after everything that happened that evening, my intuition immediately flared up, very clear, very cold. I quietly sat up, trying not to make a sound. The room was pitch black, with only a faint glimmer of light filtering in from the window. I stepped out barefoot, walking very slowly through the living room. And then, before I even got close to the balcony door, I heard Hung's voice. He was standing with his back to the house, one hand holding the phone to his ear, the other resting on the railing. His voice was very low, but in the quiet of the night, every word cut through clearly to my ears. I was just about to step back when, at that very moment, Hung spoke, and that sentence left me frozen, as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. "Don't worry, boss, tomorrow night you'll get to sleep with my wife." I went numb. In that moment, I hadn't misheard, and I couldn't fool myself into thinking it was some meaningless joke between men. Every word Hung uttered was so clear, distinct, and cold that a chill ran down my spine. My hands trembled violently. I had to grab the wall to keep from collapsing. Outside on the balcony, Hung kept on chuckling. It was a servile tone he had never used with me before. "Yes, sir, you can rest assured. My wife is pretty, obedient, and knows her place. You'll definitely be satisfied." I bit my lip so hard I could taste the metallic tang of blood on my tongue. If I had rushed out then, I probably would have screamed, snatched the phone from Hung, and slapped him across the face. But somehow, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, a spark of reason kept me rooted to the spot. I held my breath, forcing myself not to move, not to make even the slightest sound. Hung continued, his voice lower but still filled with eagerness. "You're helping me out with this deal, and I won't ever forget your kindness. Once the contract is signed, I promise to follow you all the way." Every single word felt like a knife stabbing straight into my chest. So, that 20 billion contract he'd been gloating about all evening. The dream of a better life that he and his mother were fantasizing about at dinner was being traded for me. Not through capability, not through effort, but by offering his own wife to please his superior. That was when I finally understood what being reasonable meant, the way Hung said it earlier. It wasn't that he knew how to be reasonable at work, but that he wanted me to be reasonable in his place. My hands were ice cold, my whole body trembling, yet my mind felt strangely sharp. I tried to listen more, because I knew that only by listening could I understand just how terrible a situation I was facing. The person on the other end seemed to say something, because Hung chuckled and replied immediately, "Yes, I understand. Just leave it to me. She usually listens to me. She might fuss a little at first, but once I tell her, she has to obey." I squeezed my eyes shut. Obey, really? I suddenly felt a bitter sense of amusement. All these years, I had thought my patience was to keep the peace in our home. I endured my mother-in-law's harsh words, my husband's baseless irritability, and even the times he looked down on my dance teaching job. I thought that was tolerance. But it turned out that in his eyes, my patience had become something that made him feel entitled to trample on me completely. Then Hung suddenly said a name, "Mr. Tuan, just trust me." Just those 3 words and my heart tightened. Mr. Tuan. That name was like a stone thrown into the depths of memories I thought were long buried. A blurry, old shadow flashed through my mind. A time from many years ago when I was still very young, before I entered this marriage, but everything flashed for a moment and then vanished. I hadn't managed to grasp it yet, nor did I dare to believe my own intuition. Outside, Hung said his final words and hung up the phone. Startled, I hurriedly retreated quietly back to the room before he could walk in. Each step felt like walking on cotton, but my chest felt as heavy as if I were carrying stones. Reaching the bed, I immediately lay down, pulled the blanket over me, and tried to force my breathing back to normal. A few seconds later, the door opened. Hung stepped in very softly. I could clearly hear his footsteps, and the sound of the bed sinking slightly as he lay back down beside me. He probably thought I was still fast asleep, because a moment later, he even reached out to pull the blanket over me as if he were a very caring husband. That very gesture was what made me shudder. I lay still with my eyes squeezed shut, but my mind was no longer filled with simple pain. It was humiliation, indignation, and a feeling of being betrayed to the very core. The man lying next to me, the one who calls me wife, the one who just sat eating with me and speaking sweet words to me and our child, could actually treat me like a gift to offer someone else. I couldn't sleep at all for the rest of that night. I just lay there silently like a shadow. But inside, waves were crashing violently. And near dawn, before the sky even began to brighten, I whispered to myself, "If you dared to sell me out, I will surely make you pay the price." The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Having barely slept, my eyes stung and my head throbbed, but strangely, my mind felt chillingly clear. I no longer felt the panic I had when I stood frozen on the balcony. After a night beside the husband who had just bargained me away, I realized that if I only cried, questioned him, or made a scene, I would be the one who loses first. So, I still went into the kitchen as I always did. I made breakfast, prepared warm water, and set the table, my movements steady and orderly, just like any other day. Hung stepped out of the room, looking quite relaxed. He probably thought I knew absolutely nothing. It makes sense. A man who dares to trade his own wife wouldn't have the conscience to imagine she could ever see his true colors. While plating the eggs, I tried to keep my voice natural and asked as if it were a slip of the tongue. "Yesterday you said some big boss was backing you on that contract. Who was it? Did I hear you call him Tuan, or was it someone else?" I had barely finished mentioning the name, but Hung's reaction immediately made me understand that I hadn't guessed wrong. His hand holding the glass paused for a split second. Then he lowered his head, pretending to drink, and replied dismissively, "Oh, just a boss at the company. Why do you ask?" I turned to look at him, keeping my expression calm. "I was just asking. You seemed so happy yesterday, so I was curious." Hung frowned, clearly starting to get defensive. He hastily grabbed a piece of egg and put it in his mouth, then replied bluntly, "You wouldn't understand my work stuff. Why stress yourself out by knowing too much? If it had been in the past, I probably would have let it slide in silence." But that morning, every word Hung said only made me more certain that he was hiding something very dirty. I didn't ask any further. I knew asking more now would only make him more suspicious. After eating, Hung went upstairs to get dressed for work. I also prepared to head out to the center, but before leaving, I decided I had to find out who this Tuan person was. The opportunity came faster than I thought. Once Hung finished changing his shirt, he rushed into the bathroom. As soon as the water turned on, I immediately headed back to the bedroom. His phone was on the nightstand, screen still lit. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. Perhaps after the shock of last night, I was no longer the woman who only knew how to tremble. I picked up the phone, opened the contacts, and my finger scrolled through the names until it stopped at a simple but striking entry. Tuan, GM, those 3 words alone were enough to send a chill down my spine. GM means he is no ordinary person. At least in Hung's eyes, he is someone powerful enough to make him bow, grovel, and be willing to sell his own wife's dignity to please him. I quickly memorized the phone number, then took my phone and snapped a quick screenshot. Finished, I placed Hung's phone back exactly where it was, almost perfectly aligned. Just then, the sound of water in the bathroom began to fade. I stepped out of the room, my heart still racing, but my face had to remain as calm as if nothing had happened. On the way to the center, my mind was spinning with a series of questions. Who exactly is this Tuan? Why have I only just heard of him? I have felt such a sense of unease in my heart. Is it just a name shared with someone from the past, or is it truly him? I waited until the lunch break, when the children had gone to their music lessons next door, to quietly step out into the empty hallway and take out my phone. I didn't use my own number. I borrowed a close colleague's phone, making an excuse that I needed to confirm a class schedule with a parent. My hand trembled slightly as I dialed the sequence of numbers I had just written down. The phone rang twice before the person on the other end answered. Hello? With just that one word, my whole body froze. It was that voice. Even though many years have passed, and it sounded deeper, gravelier, and more authoritative, I recognized it immediately. There's no mistaking it. The man on the other end of the line was Din Tuan. I hung up immediately, my hand holding the phone turning ice cold. My mind went blank for a few seconds. I stood frozen in the hallway, my ears ringing, my heart pounding as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. Din Tuan, that name pulled me back to a time over 10 years ago when I was a high school girl, just learning to love, learning to fear, and naive enough to think that as long as I lived decently, evil things would stay away from me. But Din Tuan was the kind of person who made me realize very early on that there are people in this world born used to using money and power to force others to revolve around them. Back then, Tuan was in the same grade as me for all 3 years of high school. He was famous in school, not for being a good student or a kind person, but for his partying, stubbornness, and tendency to show off. His family was wealthy. His father held a high position, his mother dealt in real estate. So even while at school, he drove nice cars, wore designer clothes, and spent money like water. While his peers were busy with tutoring and exams, he only cared about hanging out, fighting, skipping class, and flirting with one girl after another. Back then, I took dance classes from a young age, so my physique was quite striking, and I often participated in school performances. Perhaps that is why Tuan took notice of me. But his way of showing interest was not like other boys my age. It was not a youthful crush, and certainly not sincere. It was blatant possessiveness. He blocked my path after school, had friends bring gifts to my class, and intentionally stood at the gate staring every time I walked out. There was one time he said something I still remember vividly to this day, in a voice that was both laughing and arrogant. Knock thou, one day you will have to like me. What I want has never slipped through my fingers before. That very sentence made me feel horrified. I didn't hate him because he was a poor student or rich. I hated the way he looked at people like objects. I hated that attitude of disregarding every boundary, treating success or failure as just a matter of time. So, for those 3 years, I never gave him a single chance. I refused him directly, and avoided him outright. I even once told him very clearly to his face, I don't like the kind of lazy, playboy person who looks down on others like you. At that moment, the look Din Tuan gave me is something I still remember. It wasn't the look of someone rejected and sad as you'd usually see, but a look that was furious, obsessed, and like he couldn't swallow his own pride. He smiled, but the smile was distorted, and he whispered, there will come a day you will regret this. Since hearing his voice again this morning, that memory has been crystal clear in my mind. And now, I understand. Din Tuan doesn't want me just because I'm beautiful. He isn't helping Hung out of pity or to support a subordinate. He is coming back to take what he couldn't have before, no matter what. He wants to possess me. And even worse, he might want me to kneel down in a situation more humiliating than before to make up for the shame of being rejected back then. And Hung, does Hung know? He must know. It's impossible for a husband who has heard his wife tell stories of the past not to recognize that name. Yet, he still turned a blind eye and used me as a bargaining chip. At that very moment, I no longer felt like a betrayed wife. I felt like a piece of merchandise targeted by both men in 2 different ways. One wants to satisfy his possessiveness, the other wants to change his life by selling his wife. I stood frozen for a long time at the end of the hallway. The wind from the window blew in ice cold. But inside me, fear had begun to give way to something sharper, colder. I knew that from this moment on, I could no longer remain passive. If they had set a trap to push me into a corner, then this time I would willingly step into it. But only to flip the entire board. From that moment on, I no longer allowed myself to be weak. The pain was still there, the humiliation was still there, but if I just kept holding onto it and crying, the loser would surely be me. As for Hung and Din Tuan, those two would continue to walk all over me, treating me like a woman who only knew how to bite her tongue and suffer. I could not let that happen. That afternoon, when I returned home, I kept the same expression as always. I changed my clothes, tied up my hair, and went down to the kitchen to cook. Hung came home a bit later than usual. As soon as he stepped through the door, he looked at me scrutinizingly as if to see if my attitude was different, but I had already prepared for that. I turned to him, smiled very lightly, my voice so calm that even I found it strange. "You're home? I made your favorite dish today." Perhaps seeing me as soft as usual, Hung visibly relaxed. During the meal, he even acted unusually eager, asking a few harmless, trivial questions. I knew he was probing to see if I knew anything yet, but the more he did that, the more I had to play my part. When I was almost finished eating, I set my bowl down and intentionally lowered my voice, as if I were too shy to ask. "Honey, about what you mentioned yesterday regarding meeting your boss, if you really need me to, I will go." Hung froze, his eyes lighting up immediately. I will never forget that look. It was not the grateful look of a husband being helped by his wife. It was the joyful look of a merchant seeing an item he was about to sell for a high price. "Are you serious?" he asked back, trying to act surprised. I looked down, pretending to be shy. "After all, I am your wife. If that helps you sign a big contract, I don't want to be the one standing in your way." Hearing that, Hung could barely hide his delight. He sat up straight, his voice lower but full of excitement. "I knew it, my wife is the most understanding. With you by my side, everything will be easy for me later." From then on, he began instructing me on every little thing. The way he spoke, the way he leaned toward me, the way he repeated every detail. He no longer seemed like a husband, but exactly like a pimp coaching his merchandise on how to please a client. "Tomorrow, wear that cream-colored dress. The one that gently hugs your body. Don't make it too modest, but don't make it too revealing either. My boss likes an elegant style. Wear light makeup, nothing too heavy. Mr. Tuan likes women who look clean and classy. Oh, and leave your hair down. You look younger with it down." Every word he uttered made me want to throw the dinner tray in his face, but I stayed there, nodding slightly, occasionally asking questions as if I were genuinely preparing for an important meeting. "Should I bring any gifts?" "No need. Just you showing up is enough." Hung smirked. That sentence made my stomach churn. Just showing up is enough. It meant that in their eyes, my body and honor were enough to trade for a contract. I clenched my teeth, trying to keep my hands under the table from shaking. That night, when Hung went to shower, I locked the bedroom door and took out the handbag I usually carry to work. I sat for a long time at my vanity, looking at my face in the mirror. It was still me. Still these eyes, this hair, this face that the kids at the center chirped about as the most beautiful Miss Thou. But I had never felt as much of a stranger to myself as I did at that moment, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't preparing to look beautiful, but to step into a trap set by my own husband. I opened the drawer and took out the mini voice recorder that the center used to use for recording practice music. I checked the battery, tried recording a few sentences, and tucked it into a secret compartment in my bag. After that, I grabbed the small camera that a parent had asked me to look after a few days ago. This type of camera clips on very neatly. If attached to the bag's zipper, outsiders would hardly notice it. I sat down to adjust the camera angle carefully, pacing back and forth in the room to be sure. With every move I made, my heart pounded a little harder. I knew I was doing something very risky, but I knew even better that if I walked in there tomorrow empty-handed, I would be a real fool. Once prepared, I opened my phone and looked for Kwang Min's number. Min is an old friend of my brother's who works in law and once helped our family handle a minor dispute. I hesitated for nearly a minute before daring to hit call. The other end picked up quite quickly, his voice as calm and clear as ever. "Duh, is that you? What's up calling me at this hour?" I took a deep breath and explained it very briefly, no rambling, just straight to the point. I told him about Hung, about Din Tuan, about last night's phone call, and how they planned to corner me into a shady meeting tomorrow. On the other end of the line, Min was silent for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was much firmer. If what you're saying is true, this is no longer just a marital spat. This shows signs of coercion, disguised solicitation, and elements of illicit exchange. You absolutely must not go empty-handed. I gripped the phone tightly. So if I have video and audio recordings of him admitting it, would that be enough? It would be enough to turn the tide if you keep a cool head. But listen to me, you have to be extremely careful. The kind of person who dares to sell his wife for a contract might do something more reckless than you think when exposed. That sentence made me fall silent for a few seconds. I knew Min was right, and because of that, I decided to take one more step. After hanging up, I opened my contact list again, looking for the number of an acquaintance who is a social affairs reporter. I didn't go into detail, just sent a brief message that tomorrow a major incident involving the coercion of women and dirty business dealings might occur. I will contact you immediately if needed. After sending that message, I sat still for a long time. I realized I had changed. If it were the knock thou of a few days ago, I would probably be hugging my pillow and crying in despair right now. But the woman sitting in front of the mirror tonight was no longer crying. I felt my heart turn cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear-headed. The next afternoon, just as I had guessed, my mother-in-law began dropping hints and instructions. She walked past my room, saw me hanging the cream-colored dress on the closet door, and stopped, her voice soft but full of hidden meaning. Women, once married, must know how to sacrifice for their husbands. Don't let a little female pride ruin the bigger picture. I turned to look at her. If it were before, I might have felt sorry for myself, my throat choked with pain. But this time, I saw one thing clearly. She never considered me a daughter-in-law, much less a human being with self-respect. In her eyes, I was merely a tool to help her son change his life. I smiled very faintly, so faintly that she probably couldn't guess what was going through my head. Then I replied, slowly and deliberately, "Don't worry, Mother, I will play my part perfectly." Mrs. Twee nodded, thinking I had obediently accepted my fate. But she didn't know that from that moment on, the submissive daughter-in-law she was used to was gone, replaced by a woman pushed to the wall, ready to flip the entire chessboard they thought they had already won. The next day, I arrived at the hotel exactly at the time Hung had messaged. From the moment I stepped out of the house, I felt his gaze following me. It wasn't the look of a husband caring for his wife, but the look of someone anxiously waiting for the goods to be delivered to the client. I wore the exact cream-colored dress he chose, with light makeup and my hair worn naturally. Looking in the mirror before leaving, I saw I was still the knock thou of every day, except my eyes were no longer the same. They were colder, more alert, and no longer as naive as before. The hotel where Hung arranged to meet was a luxurious place right in the center, the kind of place my husband and I had never entered without a special reason. As soon as I got out of the car, the receptionist stepped out to open the door. Clearly, they had been instructed beforehand, a feeling that made me feel disgusted. It turned out everything had been pre-arranged, just waiting for me to step into it. I followed the staff member up to the 12th floor. Each step sank into the thick, soft carpet under my heels. My heart skipped another beat. But on the outside, I kept a calm expression. I knew that if I showed even a hint of panic, the person waiting in that room would immediately be on guard. As soon as the door opened, I saw him. Din Tuan was standing by the large window. He wore a sharp, dark gray suit. Compared to the arrogant boy he once was, he now looked like a successful man, with combed hair, a shiny watch, and spotless shoes. But just by looking into his eyes, I knew the old nature I once dreaded was still inside, greedy, arrogant, and possessive. Seeing me walk in, he smiled. That smile made me want to throw up. Unexpectedly, he slowly walked closer, his eyes watching me without reservation. "After all these years, you're still the one I want most." If it were in the past, I would have had goosebumps from that statement. But at that moment, I only tightened my grip on my handbag, trying to muster just enough embarrassment. I lowered my head without answering right away, like a woman feeling shy before a man's advances. Tuan seemed very satisfied with that reaction. He pulled out a chair for me to sit, then personally poured wine into 2 tall glasses on the table. The room was heavy with the scent of expensive men's cologne mixed with woody notes, and the deep chill of the AC made it hard to breathe. But the more uncomfortable I felt, the more I had to sit still. He pushed one glass toward me. "Drink up, don't be so tense. We aren't strangers, are we?" I placed my hand on the rim of the glass but did not drink. I just smiled faintly. I thought we were only meeting to discuss work today. Tuan heard this and laughed out loud. It was the laugh of someone who holds the winning hand. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving me. "Work, you say? Are you really that naive, or are you just pretending? That 20 billion contract was just bait. You need bait to get the fish to bite, don't you?" Hearing him say that with his own mouth, my heart tightened, but I did not allow myself to stop there. I asked softly, my voice quiet as if I were truly afraid, "What do you mean?" Tuan took a sip of his drink and set the glass down very gently. "You mean my husband wants the contract, and you?" He looked straight at me, his lip curling. "I want you. Everyone gets something, it's only fair." Every word felt like a knife cutting into my ears. The way he spoke about me, about Hung, about that contract, was just like discussing a marketplace deal. No sentiment, no morals, not a shred of shame, but I had to keep going. I looked down and swirled my glass, then asked again as if I still couldn't believe it. "And Hung, he knows all about this?" Tuan smiled coldly. "He didn't just know, he was the one who proposed it. I'm just going along with it. Don't look at me like I'm the only one to blame here." He paused for a moment and continued. Every word felt like it was deliberately stabbing deep into my heart. "Your husband is even more impatient than I am. He said as long as I sign, one night or even a few nights with you is fine." My nails dug deep into my palms until it stung. That was enough. That alone was enough to kill everything left of my marriage. But I remained still, letting him think I was shaken, that I was being backed into a corner. I looked up at him for a long time and asked slowly, "What if I don't agree?" Tuan shrugged, his expression chillingly indifferent. "Then your husband loses the contract and any chance to get ahead, but I don't think you're that stupid. Women like you marry, work for years, all just hoping your husbands get ahead. Now you're trading one night for a whole future. What a steal." I let out a soft laugh. My own laughter made him hesitate. Perhaps he didn't expect me to be able to laugh after such filth. Tuan started to stand up and walk around to my side. I knew he thought the time was ripe. He walked very slowly, saying, "Knock thou, you rejected me back then and I always regretted it, but I told you, whatever I want, sooner or later, must be mine." As he reached out to touch my shoulder, I immediately jumped to my feet and stepped back. The chair scraped against the floor, creating a harsh sound in the quiet room. I looked him straight in the eye, devoid of any shyness or weakness. My hand reached into my pocket, pressed play on the recording, and held the phone up to his face. His voice from earlier rang out clearly through the space. "That 20 billion contract is just the bait. Your husband wants the contract, and I want you." Din Tuan froze. For the first time, the confidence on his face faltered. Quote, I kept the phone steady in front of him, my voice crisp and precise with every word. "You just admitted to using the contract to trade for my body, didn't you?" He stared at me for a few seconds and then suddenly burst out laughing. But this time, it wasn't the laughter of someone who had already won, but the mocking sneer of a man who still believed he was powerful enough to crush others. He tilted his chin, his voice chilling. Quote, "What do you think you can do?" I didn't look away, my whole body still taut as a wire. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't afford to back down. I gripped the phone tightly, looked straight into the hypocritical face standing before me, and replied, slowly but distinctly, "It won't just be me. The whole society will know what kind of person you are." Right after that sentence, Din Tuan's face went completely cold. And I understood that the last door to peace between him and me had officially slammed shut. As soon as I finished, the tension in the room grew so tight that a mere touch would make it snap. Din Tuan stopped laughing, his face darkening, eyes narrowed, revealing the aggression he had been trying to hide. But I knew I wasn't allowed to retreat just yet. I had to keep him in that exact spot for a few more minutes. I squeezed the phone in my hand, looked him in the eye, and asked, my voice chillingly calm, Make it clear, was that contract in exchange for my body, or did my husband hand me over to you himself? That question hit a nerve, piercing his filthy male ego. Din Tuan curled his lip and turned to pour himself more wine, his arrogant demeanor exactly as it had been back then. He leaned back into his chair, crossed his legs, his voice full of contempt. Do you think you're worth that much? Without me, your husband is just a nobody, he's the one who begged me. He laughed after speaking, as if the humiliation he had caused me wasn't enough. He added an even filthier remark. He said, as long as I sign a contract for one night or even a few nights with you, it means he gets the money, the position, and the way to climb up. Every word cut into my ears, but inside, I went completely silent. When pain reaches a certain threshold, people no longer feel tears, only a chilling cold and a terrifying sense of clarity. I knew that was enough. Enough to expose both men before me, enough for anyone listening to clearly understand how I had been traded. But I still didn't move, because I knew my people were waiting outside for the right signal. Suddenly, hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by someone shouting lowly into a phone, intermittent but full of irritation. Din Tuan tilted his head slightly to listen, while I held my breath. I understood that everything had started moving in the right direction. Just then, the door flew open, and the person who rushed in was none other than Van Hung. I looked at him and nearly laughed out of disgust. It turns out he never truly felt at ease leaving me with Tuan like a piece of merchandise to walk away. He had been hiding in the next room, waiting to rush out and force me if I resisted. A man who is cowardly, filthy, and calculating to the very end. Seeing me still standing there, Hung's eyes widened as he barked, his voice devoid of any pretense of tenderness. What kind of act are you putting on? I told you to come here to help your husband, not to ruin things. I took a step back, looking at the man before me with disgust to my very core. Just last night, he was still lying next to me like a husband. Yet here he was now, standing right in front of a man demanding to sleep with his wife, not only unashamed but actually yelling at me. Din Tuan stood up, walked over to the door, and locked it. The cold click echoing through the closed room made it clear exactly how they intended to trap me. He turned back, his voice dropping to a chilling tone. Since you're already here, just be compliant. Don't make things uglier, quote. Before I could answer, Hung lunged forward, grabbing my wrist so hard it hurt. I looked up at him, seeing for the first time the true face of a brute hiding behind the mask of a gentle husband. He gritted out every word, it's just one night, you're acting like you're dying. You are my wife, you must do what I say. That sentence made something inside my head feel like it was exploding. All the humiliation, all the pain, all the years of endurance felt like they were torn apart and thrown right in my face at that very moment. I yanked my hand away, stared straight at the two men, the buyer and the seller, before me, and screamed, my voice sounding so strange even to my own ears. I am a human being, not a piece of merchandise for you to pass around. The air froze for a second. Perhaps neither Hung nor Tuan expected me to dare scream like that. Hung was stunned, but in a split second, he reverted to his base, cowardly nature. He rushed forward, trying to grab me and drag me deeper into the room, his voice low and vicious. Don't force me to get rough. Whether you agree or not, you will do it today. I backed away, my spine nearly hitting the edge of the table, my heart pounding as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. I knew that if I were a beat slow in this moment, I would truly be cornered against the wall by these two people. But just as Hung reached out to grab my shoulder again, crash. The door was kicked open violently from the outside. That sound rang out like a thunderclap. The door lock burst open, slamming hard against the wall. Hung jumped and spun around, and Din Tuan also turned pale, taking a full step back. As for me, the moment I saw the first figure walk in, my knees nearly buckled. All the pent-up tension finally had an outlet. The person standing at the door was my brother. Con Dewey stepped inside first, his expression cold as steel. Behind him were two more men, one dressed simply like an average driver, the other tall and sharp-eyed, clearly not there for idle conversation. The luxurious room from a moment ago had turned into a battlefield in a single heartbeat. Con Dewey looked straight at Hung, not shouting or snarling, but every word he spoke was sharp enough to send a chill down one's spine. "Get your filthy hands off my sister." From that very first sentence, I knew their game had truly been flipped. At that very remark, Hung's hand, which was just about to touch me, instantly froze and then dropped. I could hear him swallow hard, and his face turned visibly pale. Perhaps it was only then he realized that the person who just kicked the door open was none other than my brother, whom he only knew from a few brief encounters, enough to know he wasn't someone to mess with. Con Dewey stood towering at the doorway, wearing only a dark shirt and slacks. Simple, no flash, no noise, but his gaze was so cold it instantly changed the atmosphere of the already stifling room. Following him was a man in a thin jacket wearing a baseball cap, looking no different than a rideshare driver who had just parked in the lobby. The other man was taller, square-jawed, and sturdily built. One sweep of his gaze was enough to know he wasn't there to intervene with words. As soon as Din Tuan caught sight of my brother, his expression changed instantly. It was only for a fleeting moment, but I still saw the arrogance in his eyes falter. He clearly recognized that the person one should never cross had truly stepped into this room. I stepped back a few paces, panting, my wrist still burning from Hung's grip. But at that very moment, for the first time since the night began, I felt I didn't have to fight alone anymore. The feeling of being cornered like a helpless prey just moments ago had been shattered in a few short seconds by the sound of my brother kicking down the door. Hung was the first to regain his voice, but he no longer had that aggressive air from before. He forced a smile, trying to swallow his panic before speaking in a clearly artificial tone. You misunderstood. We're just a married couple settling our own private affairs." Hearing that, Con Dewey let out a faint, dry laugh. It wasn't a loud laugh meant to intimidate, but a look of absolute contempt that was more humiliating to the recipient than being shouted at directly. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Hung. "Private affairs, you say? Private affairs like selling your wife for a contract?" That sentence echoed through the luxury room like a slap in the face. Hung was struck speechless. He opened his mouth to say something, but couldn't form a sentence after several attempts. Perhaps by now he finally understood that the charade he and Tuan set up hadn't just been seen through by me, but was now completely in someone else's hands. Seeing Hung flustered, Din Tuan intervened, lowering his voice to feign the composure of someone powerful. "Mr. Dewey, this is a matter involving my company's staff. It wouldn't be wise for you to get so deeply involved. If it were anyone else, they might have backed down upon hearing that tone, half threat and half warning, but not Con Dewey." He turned his head to look at Tuan, his gaze so cold that even I felt a chill run down my spine. Without rushing or raising his voice, he walked straight up to him, stopped less than an arm's length away, and spoke clearly, each word hitting like a nail. "Your company still owes me a nod of approval for next quarter's deal. Who do you think you are to dare touch my sister?" The room fell completely silent. Even I felt my heart tighten at those words. I knew my brother did big business and had a reputation in the industry, but only then did I understand exactly what that reputation entailed. As for Din Tuan, his face went pale instantly. He stopped smiling, and his hand on the table withdrew quickly, as if he had just touched something scalding. Only then did I speak up, my voice still trembling from the aftershocks, yet every word was clear. "I didn't come here alone. Since I got out of the car, my brother has been sitting in the taxi parked behind the hotel. The driver you thought was just a rideshare worker is actually the person I brought along in case you tried anything reckless." The man in the baseball cap standing behind me said nothing, simply taking off his hat to reveal a rugged face. Meanwhile, the tall guy next to him leaned slightly to the side, blocking the exit. That alone was enough to make things clear. I had been suspicious from the start, and I wasn't foolish enough to walk into a wolf's den without any preparation. Hung turned to look at me, his eyes wide with a mix of anger and shock. How dare you set me up?" I looked him straight in the eyes, no longer dodging his gaze. "No, I'm just saving myself. You're the one who pushed me to this point." That answer left Hung speechless, his face flushing and paling by turns, his hands clenching and unclenching as if he were trying to find an escape in his mind, only to get more tangled. I understand that feeling, because this is the first time in my life. He realizes the woman he thought would only endure and obey is no longer standing where she used to be. Con Dewey stepped back half a pace, standing level with me like a wall in front of me. He didn't turn his head, but his voice, directed at me, was deeper and firmer. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Just those 4 words were enough to make my nose sting. Since last night, I had tried to stay so tough that I almost forgot I could feel fear. But when I heard him say that, I finally felt my body go limp with exhaustion. I could still stand, still stay alert. But if my brother hadn't appeared just in time, I don't know what would have happened next. Din Tuan no longer kept his composure. He tried to regain a stern tone, but he was clearly losing steam. "Dewey, everything can be talked over. There's no need to blow this out of proportion." Con Dewey turned to look at him, his gaze chilling to the bone. "You just locked the door, your employees were grabbing my sister's arm, and you were waiting to reap the rewards. Now you want to talk it over?" No one spoke. Only the air conditioner hummed steadily overhead. The glasses someone had clinked earlier were still vibrating slightly on the table. Everything in the room was exactly as it was when I walked in, only the tables had completely turned. Din Tuan was no longer the one waiting for his prey. Van Hung was no longer the husband in control, pressuring his wife, and I was no longer the woman they treated like a piece of merchandise. Con Dewey tilted his head slightly, finally turning to look at me. His gaze was still stern, but his voice had dropped, sounding very firm and clear. "Thou, just say one word. Do you want to handle this privately or right here?" I didn't answer Dewey immediately. I just looked from Hung to Din Tuan, then looked back at the phone resting in my palm. After everything that just happened, I understood that if I let them deny it, twist the truth, or play the victim, I would be the one who loses in the end. Thinking that, I took a deep breath, opened the recording I had just made, and pressed play. Din Tuan's voice immediately rang out in the room, crystal clear, not a single word missing. "Your husband wants the contract, and I want you." Then came the next sentence, enough to nail the coffin shut on the fake decency those 2 men had worn. "He was the one who begged me. He said as long as I sign, one night or a few nights with you is fine." The atmosphere seemed to freeze over. If Hung had been trying to pretend he was misunderstood earlier, at that moment, his face went as pale as someone slapped in a crowded marketplace. I saw his throat move, his eyes darting around as if desperately searching for a way out. But that is the nature of people like him. The more they are cornered, the more their cowardice is revealed. He didn't turn to apologize to me, nor did he bow his head to admit his fault. The first thing he did was point his finger straight at Din Tuan. "Tuan forced me," Hung shouted, his voice cracking completely. "If it weren't for you, how would I dare? I had no other choice." Hearing that, Din Tuan jumped up. That calm, distinguished demeanor he had moments ago vanished completely. He pointed right at Hung's face, cursing him without holding anything back. "Shut your mouth, you were the one who offered your wife, and now that it's exposed, you blame me?" Like a cornered dog whose tail had been stepped on, Hung lunged forward and grabbed Tuan by the collar. "If you hadn't promised me that contract, why the hell would I have to endure this humiliation?" He gritted his teeth, his eyes bloodshot. "I did everything because you said if I just brought her here, everything would be finished." Din Tuan was grabbed unexpectedly, staggering back until his spine hit the edge of the glass table. A row of wine glasses rattled and spilled all over the carpet, the pungent smell of alcohol rising sharply. He glared, shoved Hung away hard, and shouted, "A guy like you, I just need to toss a bone and you'd come wagging your tail. Don't sit there playing the victim." Quote. 2 men who just minutes ago were buyer and seller now stood before me, tearing into each other like starving beasts. The scene was so disgusting that I suddenly didn't feel the pain I felt at first anymore, perhaps because by now, every illusion within me had completely died. But the cruelest blow hadn't stopped there. Hung was shoved back a few steps, his shoulder hitting the chair. He panted heavily, then suddenly snapped toward me, screaming a sentence I would likely never forget for the rest of my life. "If it weren't for that contract, I wouldn't bother putting up with this woman for all these years." The statement rang out harshly in the luxurious room, sounding even filthier than gutter trash. Everything inside me suddenly went silent. No more stinging, no more trembling, just a frozen void. So those years I thought we were building a life together as husband and wife, the endurance I thought would bring stability was, in his eyes, just time spent waiting to squeeze out every last benefit. I looked straight into his face, my voice flat and cold. "You didn't endure me, You endured because you hadn't squeezed everything you needed from me yet. Hung opened his mouth to argue, but couldn't get a single word out. Perhaps he himself understood that I had struck the filthiest part of his conscience. Meanwhile, Dewey, who had been standing still and observing from the start, gave a slight nod. The guard accompanying him immediately stepped forward, locked the room, and stood right in front of the exit. Neither of those two men had any chance of slipping away now. Seeing this, Din Tuan's eyes began to waver. He turned to Ann Dewey, his voice trying to sound firm but clearly running out of breath. "You're going a bit too far with this." Ann Dewey looked at him with a smirk. "You thought tonight was just a private trade in a hotel room, and it would be over if no one knew, right?" He paused for a beat, then slowly continued. Each word felt like a slap to Tuan's face. "Your company is undergoing an internal audit. Once this recording leaks, you won't just lose the contract, your position might be at risk too." Only then did I see Din Tuan truly lose his nerve. His face darkened, and his jaw tightened. The confidence of someone backed by family vanished instantly, replaced by the frantic calculations of someone realizing the price might be beyond their control. And just as I guessed, once his position was threatened, he changed his tone, turning to me and lowering his ego to a level even he must have found shameful. "Thou, we can talk about this again. I was wrong, but it doesn't need to be blown out of proportion like this." Hearing that, I just found it laughable. Blown out of proportion? When he sat there, casually talking about sleeping with me as a condition for the deal. Did he even think about leaving me any way out? When Hung locked me in this room, grabbed my arm, yelled at me, and forced me to be obedient, did any of them think that was what they called reasonable? I cut him off immediately, my voice sharper than before. "When you intended to sleep with me to get my signature, did you think about giving me any way out?" Tuan fell silent. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Only the sound of the AC and the smell of spilled alcohol remained. Hung was breathing heavily like a bull, his eyes still bloodshot. Tuan stood there stiffly, as if someone had stripped his dignity away. As for me, for the first time all night, I didn't feel like the one being cornered anymore. I was standing in the very trap they had set, but it was they who were caught in it. And Dewey looked around and pulled out his phone to make a short call, his voice low and concise. "Show him up to the room." Just 4 words, and Din Tuan's expression changed instantly. He was no longer pale with anger, but darkened by genuine anxiety. Watching his reaction, I knew the person about to enter this room would be the real blow that left him with no way to hold his head up. Less than 2 minutes later, the door opened once again. The person who entered wasn't the police as one might expect when things fall apart, but a man over 50, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a simple dark suit, yet radiating the aura of someone used to being in control. As soon as he appeared, the already stifling room felt even heavier. I didn't know him, but just by looking at Din Tuan's reaction, it was clear this person was no ordinary character. Tuan's face changed instantly. The scowl he had been holding onto vanished, replaced by a confusion clearly visible in his eyes. He hurried half a step forward, stammering, Uncle Fuck, why are you here?" The man called Uncle Fuck did not answer immediately. He stood still at the door, casting his eyes around the room. Before the glass table, alcohol was spilled everywhere, Hung's shirt was still crumpled from the scuffle, and I stood huddled to one side, my wrists still marked red. In those few seconds of observation, his face had already turned completely cold. He looked straight at Tuan, his voice low and sharp as a knife. "I thought you were negotiating a contract, but it turns out you're running a human trafficking market." That statement, thrown directly into Din Tuan's face, didn't need to be loud to leave him paralyzed. I looked at him, seeing for the first time that a man who always acted so arrogant clearly showed fear. Turns out he thought he was a big shot all this time, but before this man, he was just a spoiled brat having his cover stripped away. Only then did Dewey step forward, without any long-winded talk, without exchanging another word. He pulled out his phone, transferred the recorded file, and then removed the mini-camera clip to my bag to hand over to Mr. Fuck. Every movement was decisive, precise, and cold. Mr. Fuck took it and opened it right there on the spot. The room was so quiet that only the sound from the device could be heard. Din Tuan's voice rang out crystal clear. Your husband wants the contract, and I want you. Then came the next sentence, one that would make any decent person sick to their stomach. He said as long as I sign, one night or a few nights with you is fine. Every word seemed to personally strangle the last bit of his hope. Mr. Fuck listened to it all without interrupting or shouting, but his face grew harder with every word. When Hung rushed into the room, grabbed my arm, and shouted, "You are my wife, you have to listen to me," his jaw tightened. After watching, he turned off the device and looked up at Tuan. That gaze wasn't loudly angry, but it was so cold that it was more terrifying than any outburst of shouting. Then he spoke, each word falling like a sledgehammer. From this moment on, you are suspended from all your duties. No one spoke. Just a single sentence, but I saw Din Tuan's feet seemingly rooted to the ground, his eyes widened, and his lips trembled several times before he could utter a weak response. "Uncle, you have to listen to my explanation." Mr. Fuck cut him off, his voice not loud but allowing absolutely no interruption. "Shut up, what kind of explanation? Are you going to explain how you used your position to trade for a woman's body, or how you consider law and morality a joke?" Din Tuan stood stunned, his face deathly pale, while Van Hung looked as if he'd been struck over the head. Up until now, he had still hoped to cling to Tuan, seeing it as his final lifeline. Yet now, in just one sentence, that lifeline had been punctured. I saw Hung's face completely contort. He turned to look at me, then at Dewey, then back at Mr. Fuck, like a trapped rat frantically looking for a way out. Then, suddenly, he truly collapsed, not out of regret, but out of fear. He lunged in front of me, his knees hitting the floor hard, his voice trembling. I was wrong. I was pushed into a corner, which is why I made a mistake. Save me this one time. I'm begging you, we are husband and wife." I looked down at him. The man who once shared my bed for so many years, whom I trusted so deeply I never once let my guard down, now kneels at my feet, blood drained from his face, mouth uttering apologies, but his eyes reveal only the fear of losing his status, his money, his livelihood. I stare at him for a long time, yet I feel not even a shred of pity. Perhaps because the very moment he grabbed my hand and dragged me into that room corner, whatever remained of our marriage had already died. I reply, my voice clipped and cold, but every word seems to cut into his skin. "When you grabbed my hand to drag me into that room, did you ever think about how I was being backed into a corner too?" Hung freezes, his face twitching, but he cannot utter a single word. The room falls into silence. Just then, Hung's phone on the table vibrates continuously. Once, twice, 3 times, the screen lights up, clearly displaying Mother Twee. He flinches as if grasping at a straw, reaching out quickly to turn it off. But Dewey is faster. He intercepts, looks at him, then turns to me and turns on the speakerphone. Hung reflexively shakes his head, his voice panicked. No, that's not necessary." Dewey says nothing more. Just one look from him is enough to make him stop dead in his tracks. I step forward, personally press to answer the call, and turn on the speaker. On the other end, my mother-in-law's voice rings out loud and clear, without a hint of doubt or caution, filled only with impatience and eagerness. "Is it done yet? Tell her not to ruin the deal. A woman who knows how to keep her husband is wise. Sacrificing one night loses her nothing." The air in the room freezes. I hear it and let out a hollow laugh. The laughter is faint, but even I can feel just how cold it really is. That is enough. There is nothing left to doubt. Mrs. Twee is not someone being deceived by her son, nor is she someone naive who knows nothing. She knows, and she approves. She is impatiently waiting for this night where I am traded to go smoothly so her son can change his life. On the other end, she still hasn't realized anything is wrong and continues to push. "Hello, are you listening? I said it before. Women must suffer a little to hold on to the bigger picture." I hang up the phone. No one says a word for several seconds afterward. Din Tuan stands there, frozen in place. Hung slumped as if all his bones had been removed, panting heavily. As for Mr. Fuck, after hearing that, he just turned to look at me, his voice dropping, no longer sounding like a superior disciplining a subordinate, but like someone questioning a victim directly. "Do you want to handle this internally or hand the case over to the authorities?" I didn't answer Mr. Fuck right away. I stood still for a few seconds, hearing my heart beating clearly in my chest, then slowly looked up. After everything that had just happened in that hotel room, I knew that stopping here wasn't enough. Hung and Din Tuan being exposed was one thing, but there was still Mrs. Thuy, the woman who sat at home, impatiently pushing her son to trade his wife for that contract. If she wasn't exposed tonight, by tomorrow she could still turn around, crying and playing the victimized mother-in-law who was dragged into this. I looked at Mr. Fuck and then at Dewey, my voice raspy but every word clear. I want to go to my husband's house right now. Dewey understood what I meant almost immediately. He nodded. Mr. Fuck didn't ask further. He just fell silent for a few seconds and said briefly, "Fine, I'll go with you. This matter must be settled once and for all." About half an hour later, the car stopped in front of my husband's house gate. It was late, the whole alley was deathly silent, with only the pale yellow light spilling out from the living room. I stepped out of the car first, Hung followed behind, his face drained of all blood. Din Tuan didn't come along, but his shadow seemed to still haunt the night, filthy and repulsive. I had just reached the door when Mrs. Thuy walked out of the house. Perhaps she heard the car and was so excited that she opened the door quickly, her face still wearing the eager look of someone waiting for news of her son's great achievement. She glanced at me and asked immediately, her voice full of impatience, "Is it done? Did you get the signature?" But as soon as that question popped out, she froze. Maybe that was when she finally saw my face clearly, then looked at Dewey, and then at Mr. Fuck, and finally, Hung, who was standing with his head bowed behind me. He looked as disheveled as if he'd just been dragged out of the mud. The excitement on her face vanished so quickly that I could see the corner of her mouth twitch. I didn't say much. I walked straight into the living room, took out my phone, and played the recording of the call from earlier. Her voice immediately filled the house, every word ringing out loud and clear. A woman is only smart if she keeps her husband. Sacrificing one night costs nothing. As soon as the recording ended, Mrs. Thuy looked as if her bones had been drained from her body. Her knees buckled slightly, her hands gripped the chair, and her face went pale, but for that brief moment only, before her true instincts kicked in again. She stammered, her voice clearly trembling. "Mom, I was just anxious and spoke nonsense. I didn't mean anything by it." Dewey, standing beside me, gave a faint, cold smile, his voice sharp as steel. "Selling your daughter-in-law to a partner, you call that speaking nonsense?" That sentence hit her like a slap across the face. She whipped her head around to look at Hung. Perhaps she was still hoping her son would speak up to save her, to say it was all a misunderstanding, but Hung only kept his head down, lips pursed, not daring to look at her. At that very moment, I knew she understood. She understood that tonight there was no way to deny it. I didn't scream, nor did I make a scene as she probably thought I would. I found myself unusually calm. Perhaps when a woman has been pushed to the absolute bottom of humiliation, she no longer has the energy to cry. I pulled up a chair and sat down, staring straight at Mrs. Thuy, slowly peeling back every layer. "You thought Hung was about to change his life, didn't you? You thought if I was just pushed into that hotel room, if I just bit the bullet and endured the humiliation for one night, your son would get the contract, the position, the money, and this whole family could hold their heads high, right?" Mrs. Thuy opened her mouth, but couldn't get a word in. I continued, each word heavy and clear, "But do you know something? Hung is not actually being valued at all. In Din Tuan's eyes, he is just a sacrificial pawn. If things had gone through tonight, the one being trampled would be me. And Hung, after being used, would also be kicked away like a dog. Your whole family won't be changing your lives at all. Your whole family is just being led around like clowns." With every word I spoke, her face turned a little paler. She looked at me, then at Hung, her gaze beginning to waver. It was no longer blind defense, but the panic of someone realizing for the first time how cheap a dream they had been holding on to. I pointed straight at Hung. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to pierce right through both of them. This man could sell his wife today just to get a contract. Tomorrow, he could sell his own mother just to keep his position. Mrs. Thuy stood frozen. I saw it very clearly. The hand she was gripping the chair with was trembling violently. For the first time, her eyes looking at Hung were not those of a mother looking at her darling son, but a woman seeing a demon revealed in her own home. Just then, Mr. Fuck finally spoke up. He didn't say much, just one sentence, but it was enough to slam shut the final door of Mrs. Thuy's illusions. If this hadn't been exposed, he never would have been signed on officially. From start to finish, this was just a reaction test set by Mr. Tuan. Your son Hung was nothing more than the bait. Mrs. Twee slumped into her chair like someone drained of all strength, her eyes wide, her mouth stammering. No, that's impossible. My Hung isn't that stupid. I looked at her, and at that moment, it wasn't just simple anger in my heart. It was bitterer, deeper. I said very slowly, it's not stupidity, it's greed, and greed often digs its own grave. That sentence pierced through the last layer of her sophistry. Mrs. Twee suddenly stood up and turned to slap Hung across the face. The slap rang out sharply in the silent living room. She screamed, her voice cracking completely. Are you insane? You threw this whole family into the abyss just for a fake contract. Hung held his face, his eyes bloodshot, but before he could speak, I took the divorce papers I had prepared from my bag. I walked to the table and placed them on the glass surface next to Mrs. Thai's hand. The paper lay there very thin, but it was heavier than any insult tonight. I looked straight at the two of them, my voice clear, not trembling, not choking. From this moment on, whether this family crumbles or shatters is up to you, but I am done. No one replied. The entire house was plunged into a chilling silence. And just when I thought the night had been heavy enough, the security guard who came with Dewey walked in, holding a phone and a stack of hastily printed papers. He looked at Mr. Fuck and said, the company just uncovered another suspicious financial record with Hung's signature. This matter is even bigger than what happened tonight. Before I could ask anything more, Dewey spoke up beside me. His voice was cold, deep, and sharp as a blade drawn from its sheath. Tonight is only the beginning. The divorce papers I had just set down hadn't even flattened on the glass table yet when the guard with Dewey stepped further into the living room. In his hand was a tiny black USB drive and a stack of papers still smelling of fresh ink. The air in the house, already heavy, now felt as if someone had poured a layer of freezing oil over it. Without beating around the bush, he handed the papers directly to Dewey and stepped aside. Dewey just glanced at the first few lines, his already cold face turning even colder. Then he handed everything over to Mr. Fuck. I watched the eyes of those two men, and a strange feeling suddenly welled up inside me. A gut feeling told me that tonight's events had not even touched the filthiest parts of Van Hung. Mr. Fuck pulled out a chair, sat down, placed the documents neatly in front of him, and put on his glasses. His movements were terrifyingly calm. It was that very calmness that made one's spine chill, for it showed this was no longer a domestic argument or a common case of catching an affair. This was the moment people began to peel back the layers of a human being to see how long he had been rotting inside. He turned the first page, his voice steady but sharp as a knife. Entertainment expenses $280 million, site surveys $460 million, partner support $700 million, none of them have original receipts. With every figure he read aloud, Hung's face grew paler. I stood there watching my future ex-husband, seeing the sweat drip from his temples all the way down to his neck. The aggressive demeanor he had at the hotel has completely vanished. Before me now is nothing more than a man having his darkest secrets dragged into the light. Mr. Fuck doesn't stop. He flips to the next page, his finger tapping lightly on each red printed line. Travel expenses, kickbacks, off-the-books payments, all routed through the same transfer path. Then he looks up, staring straight at Hung. How do you explain this? Hung opens his mouth, but not a single word comes out. I step a little closer, looking at the stack of statements. And at that very moment, my heart tightens. There are funds being withdrawn from the company and transferred to a secondary account held in my husband's family name. Then, from there, they circle over to a small construction company I once heard Hung mention, calling it Mr. Tuan's close partner. I stand frozen for a few seconds. So, tonight wasn't just about selling his wife to climb the ladder faster. No, it's dirtier than that, deeper than that. Hung didn't take this risk because he was desperate, he was already tainted. He and Din Tuan had been quietly gutting the company, fabricating invoices, and splitting the spoils. And that night, when he intended to trade me for a contract, it was actually a way to tie himself even tighter into that filthy circle to cover up the layers of crimes behind it. I slowly look up at him. My voice isn't loud, but it's enough to make the entire living room turn cold. So you didn't sell me because you were poor. You sold me because you were afraid that the longer I stayed, the more I'd discover how filthy you really are. That sentence hits Hung like a slap to the face. He stumbles back half a step. His lips twitch, while Mrs. Twee sits stunned in her chair, her eyes darting between me, the stack of papers, and her son's face. Only then does she perhaps begin to connect all the things she had intentionally refused to think about. She turns sharply toward Hung, her voice trembling. "Where did you get the money you've been giving me these past months to buy gold and fix the house?" "Don't tell me that." Before she can finish her sentence, Hung snaps back at her like a cornered beast. "Mom, be quiet, you don't know anything, so stop interfering." Quote, that shout leaves even Mrs. Twee completely stunned. I could clearly see the shift in her eyes. For the first time, the mother who constantly hailed her son as a brilliant businessman on the verge of success saw that the boy she adored was not a man down on his luck, but a greedy, out-of-control person ready to turn on his own mother to save his skin. Mr. Fuck closed the file and set it on the table with a soft thud, yet that sound made all of us jump. He spoke, his voice heavy as a hammer. "If these factors are verified, this is no longer a matter of ethics, this is a criminal matter." As soon as the word criminal dropped, Hung's legs truly seemed to go limp. He looked around frantically and suddenly lunged to snatch the papers on the table, but the guard blocked him instantly. With just one arm pushing him back, Hung staggered and nearly fell. The aggressive demeanor he displayed toward women earlier vanished, and now, facing someone stronger, he was pathetically cowardly. Dewey stood looking at him, his gaze ice cold. "You were quite spirited when you dragged my sister into that hotel room. Are you shaking now just because the police were mentioned?" Hung breathed heavily, his eyes bloodshot, his hands clenched until the veins popped. Perhaps he wanted to argue, to curse, to smash something to release his fear. But standing before him now was no longer just me, the person he once thought he could bully. Before him was the truth, the black and white evidence, Mr. Fuck, Dewey, and a gaping hole waiting to swallow him whole. Just as people like him always do when their escape route is sealed off, Hung turned sharply toward the person who wasn't in the room, but was present in all of our minds. "Din Tuan," he pointed, his voice cracking from panic. "I didn't do it on my own, it was all because he told me to do it. He said just to put everything in my name, and he would take care of it later." The moment that shout escaped, the whole house seemed to shake with a sound even more ghastly than cursing. It was the sound of a human being peeling off his final layer of skin in front of his mother, his wife, and everyone else. And I knew from that moment on, the tearing apart between them had truly begun, with no way back. As soon as Hung's shout died down, the living room fell into a chilling silence. I could clearly hear his ragged breathing, Mrs. Thai's dry swallows, and the ticking of the hallway clock, as if it were counting down the collapse of this family. But what chilled me most was Din Tuan's reaction. If he had any decency left, having his name dragged through such filth would have made him flinch, at the very least. But not Tuan. He simply tilted his head and suddenly let out a smirk. It wasn't a forced smile to save face, but the laugh of someone who finally stopped bothering to pretend to be a good person. He pulled up a chair, crossed his legs, and looked Hung up and down as if viewing something both disgusting and ridiculous. "That sounds nice, doesn't it?" He curled his lip, his voice low, but every word sharp enough to cut skin. "You're telling me you wouldn't have done it if I asked? Did I hold a knife to your throat?" As soon as Hung heard that, he seemed to go insane. He lunged forward instinctively, veins bulging in his neck, his eyes bloodshot like a wounded animal being slaughtered in the street. But before he could reach Tuan, the security guard intercepted, grabbing his shoulders and pulling him back. Hung's flailing, desperate attempt to strike made him look all the more pathetic. Because at this point, anyone watching could clearly see this wasn't a superior forcing a subordinate, but two of a kind, one just smarter and crueler, the other dumber and greedier. Watching Hung being restrained, Tuan's expression of contempt only deepened. He shrugged, his voice monotone, as if he were discussing something that had nothing to do with him. "I've met plenty of people like you. When you see a glimmer of profit, your eyes light up. I just tossed you a bone. You knelt down and played the dog all on your own." The moment he said that, I saw Mrs. Twee tremble visibly. All night, she had been clinging to the illusion that her son had only made one mistake, that he was still on the rise, and that if things settled, there would be a way out, but that one sentence from Tuan shattered it all. In his eyes, Hung was neither intelligent nor a partner worthy of any respect. She was just a cheap pawn, someone who could be manipulated with empty promises and a 20 billion dong pipe dream. I stood there watching the scene, and a chill ran down my spine. Indeed, there are times when you don't need to act. You just need to step back, and the truth will lay everything bare on its own. But the climax didn't end there. Din Tuan suddenly turned to Mrs. Tui, his lips curling into a sneer, his gaze both mocking and venomous. "You're quite something too, aren't you? When you called your son, you were more anxious than anyone." Quote, Mrs. Tui gasped, her mouth falling open at those words. I saw her lips trembling violently, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. She stammered, What nonsense are you spouting? I don't know anything about this." But before she could deny anything further, Mr. Fuck picked up his phone and played the recording of the call from the hotel. Her voice rang out in the living room, every word crystal clear and unmistakable. "A woman who keeps her husband is a smart one. Sacrificing one night costs nothing." It was as if someone had thrown a bucket of ice water in the face of the entire house. It was the hardest slap to the mask of the self-sacrificing mother-in-law she loved to wear. There was no way to deny it, no way to cover it up, no place left to hide behind the pretense of looking out for her child. Because those words came from her own mouth, and that cruelty was born in her own mind. I looked at her for a long time, feeling a sense of estrangement. At that moment, I no longer wanted to scream or curse. The pain had passed the threshold. Only a bitterness that reached the bone remained. I took a step forward, stood directly in front of her, and asked slowly, my words dropping like stones. "If the person being traded were your own daughter, could you still say those same words?" That question left Mrs. Twee completely speechless. Her face turned pale, her wrinkled hands visibly shaking, her lips moving without being able to utter a sound. I looked at her and knew that for the first time tonight, she was truly forced to look directly at herself. Her greed didn't just push her daughter-in-law into the abyss. It dragged her own son down, plunging the family she was so proud of into a mire they could never escape. But people, especially those who have spent their whole lives accustomed to bowing before money and power, do not admit their faults so easily. Just seconds later, her selfish instincts rose up again. She turned sharply toward Tuan, her voice trembling pathetically. "Mr. Tuan, could we talk about this again? My family made a mistake. Please show some mercy." I closed my eyes for a moment. Even now, she still didn't turn to look at me like a human being she had pushed into the abyss. The person she begged was Tuan. The one she wanted to cling to was still the person with money. That was it. It turns out she has lived her whole life with that habit. Always bowing to those stronger, begging those richer, thinking that if she just humbled herself, they would reach out to help. But Din Tuan is not the type of person who knows how to help anyone. He looked at her, laughed coldly, and let out a remark so cruel that even I felt embarrassed for her. "What do you think your family is that I would have to talk about this again?" Mrs. Twee looked as if the blood had been drained from her. I saw it very clearly. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes wide but lifeless. Perhaps her whole life she valued money and status, liking to hold her head high before the poor and bow before the rich. Yet now, the very person she wanted to cling to the most treated her like trash. No, even worse than trash, because at least trash doesn't sell its own daughter-in-law. I looked at her, and for the first time since the beginning of this story, my anger gave way to something deeper and more bitter. It wasn't pity, nor was it forgiveness, just a profound bitterness realizing there are those who, out of greed, destroy the last remnants of humanity within themselves. Just then, as the air in the room grew so thick everyone felt suffocated, my phone suddenly vibrated in my pocket. I startled and took it out. An unknown number appeared on the screen. As soon as I pressed the phone to my ear, a professional, monotone female voice came from the other end. "Yes, I am calling from the bank to confirm some urgent transactions related to your account." I looked up and stared straight at Hung. For some reason, at that exact moment, I knew this call would be a blow even more painful than everything that had just happened. I looked up, staring straight at Hung just as he was trying to calm himself down. For some reason, just seeing that face, I knew this call wasn't going to be anything small. I didn't avoid it, nor did I step away to listen elsewhere as a common courtesy. On the contrary, I immediately turned on the speakerphone. A woman's voice on the other end rang out clearly, professional and steady, yet every word felt like a stone thrown into the middle of a living room thick with fear. "Hello, I am calling from the bank to inform you that we have received an urgent request along with evidence regarding illicit transactions, the risk of asset dissipation, and emerging legal issues. We have temporarily frozen a number of suspicious transactions related to the account under the name An Van Hung and other linked accounts that require further verification. Quote, I didn't need to look to know how Hung's face had changed color, but I looked anyway. His face, flushed red from our argument a moment ago, was now as pale as if all his blood had been drained. His lips trembled, his eyes widened, and his hands clenched until the veins popped out, while the voice on the other end continued. During the review period, all transfer, withdrawal, and balance reallocation transactions will be temporarily suspended. If clarification is needed, the account holder is invited to coordinate directly with our legal department. Quote, no, Hung shouted just then, lunging straight at me like a beast whose feeding trough had been smashed. He reached out to snatch the phone, but Con Dewey blocked him right in his tracks. With just one step up from my brother, Hung stopped dead in his tracks as if hitting a stone wall. That money is mine, Hung roared. His eyes were bulging with fury. By what right do you lock it? Con Dewey didn't bother raising his voice. He just gave him a look and said coldly, clean money doesn't get locked. Dirty money locks itself. That sentence fell into the middle of the living room like a blade. Hung was speechless for a few seconds before whipping his head around to look at me. That look was no longer just simple fear. It was the panic of someone who just realized that what he had been clinging to for so long was slipping through his fingers. I know very well what he is thinking. It wasn't his reputation, his marriage, or even the exposure of him selling his wife. The one thing that drove him mad was money. I slowly ended the call, tucked my phone away, and pulled out another stack of papers I had been clutching tightly all night. These were the bank statements for our joint account. Transactions that I had quietly kept records of for a long time, even though back then, I never imagined they would be so useful one day. I flipped through each page and placed them on the table in front of Mrs. Twee and Hung. My voice wasn't loud, but the calmer it sounded, the more it sent chills down their spines. This is our joint account as a married couple. This is the savings I set aside to prepare for having children. This is the fund I saved in case my own mother fell ill. And here, I pointed to a line on the statement, is the amount you withdrew to buy a watch. This is for entertaining, this is for transfers to your project contacts, and this is the money you lied to me about as a short-term investment. I looked up and stared straight into his face. The money you spent on watches and entertaining women for projects was also the money I stayed up at night meticulously saving for this family. The room went deathly silent. Mrs. Twee sat in her chair, her eyes shifting from my face to the dense rows of numbers on the paper. Perhaps now she was finally beginning to connect the dots on things she had seen but deliberately chose to ignore. Because it was true that over the past few months, Hung had suddenly become very generous, giving money for house repairs, buying gold for his mother, gifting relatives, and bragging about big deals. Back then she was so happy, thinking her son was truly successful. Now, looking at those numbers, I saw her shoulders slump bit by bit, but I wasn't finished yet. I pulled out another thin file folder and took out some pre-clipped photocopies. Con Dewey took one look and understood my intention immediately. Without a word, I placed them next to the statements, my voice slower and clearer. And about this apartment, you still think that because our names are both on the deed, you have the upper hand, right, Hung? But you forgot one thing. The largest portion of the money contributed to this apartment came from my side of the family. Every bank transfer, every interest-free loan, every receipt, I kept them all. Hung looked as if he'd been struck in the chest. He stared at the pile of papers, then at me as if I were a complete stranger. Where on earth did you get all of this? He barked, his voice raspy. I gave a faint smile, not one of triumph, but the bone-deep bitterness of a woman who had finally woken up after being deceived for too long. Only when you said you'd hand me over to another man did I realize just how foolish I had been. But being a fool once is enough. That statement felt heavy, as if something within this house had finally shattered. No more dreams of a $20 billion contract, no more life-changing fantasies, no more dinners where my mother-in-law bragged to relatives that her son was getting a promotion. All that remained was a pile of black and white documents, frozen accounts, scrutinized assets, and the risk of losing everything. And Mrs. Twee finally began to truly panic. She suddenly stood up, walked toward me, and without warning, collapsed to her knees and grabbed my legs. I recoiled out of reflex. In all my years as a daughter-in-law in this house, I'd been criticized, bossed around, looked down upon, and used as a pawn. But I never thought a day would come where she would kneel before me like this. "Thou," she sobbed, her voice distorted. "I was wrong, I was blind. Please, save Hung just this once. I beg you." I stood still. Outsiders might think I was winning and feeling triumphant. But no, in that moment, I only felt cold. I looked at the woman clutching my legs and I knew for sure she wasn't kneeling out of love for me. She was kneeling out of fear. Fear of losing her son, her house, and everything she had. That fear was real, but her remorse toward me was anything but. I took a step back, gently but firmly letting her hand slip from my legs. I didn't kick her, shove her, or humiliate her, but I wouldn't soften my heart either. Some wounds are too deep to be erased just because someone else is crying. I looked her straight in the eye, my voice no longer angry, only heavy and bitter. "When you told me to sacrifice myself for one night, you didn't care if I lived or died. Now that it's your turn to beg for mercy, you finally feel the pain?" Mrs. Twee looked up at me, then completely collapsed, sobbing with her face in her hands. It was the first time I saw her cry without any pretense, without any pride, with no way left to hold it together. That crying wasn't pretty. But it was real, because she finally understood her family was truly falling apart, yet the person who needed to wake up most still hadn't. I had barely finished speaking when I heard Hung gritting his teeth behind me. I turned around. His eyes showed no remorse, but were instead turning a frightening shade of red. He looked at his mother kneeling at my feet, then at me, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. And right at that moment, he let out a hoarse, terrifying scream that made us all freeze. Hung's roar came out like a cornered animal, so raspy and crazed that it felt like the whole room was shaking. He pointed straight at his mother, then at me, his eyes bloodshot, face distorted by fear and fury, his voice cracking. "Mom, why are you kneeling? At worst, we'll just dump this woman and find someone else. We have plenty of ways to survive, don't we?" As soon as those words left his mouth, I clearly heard Mrs. Twee catch her breath, choking in her throat. She snapped her head up to look at her son. That look was no longer the gaze of a mother unconditionally defending her child, but the horrified stare of someone realizing the thing she raised all these years was no longer human. As for me, even having witnessed Hung reveal his true face since the hotel, I was still stunned for a moment. I thought his disgusting nature had already hit rock bottom, but it turned out that when cornered, his true nature was even filthier and more cruel than I had imagined. This man didn't just sell his wife. He was ready to shove his own mother aside as long as he could find a way to save himself. But Hung still didn't stop. He jerked his hand, pointing at everyone one by one, as if everyone in this house owed him a life. Then he screamed again, his voice breaking with fury. "This is all because of you people. My mother was always pushing me to climb higher, to be a big shot, to outdo everyone. And you?" He turned to me, eyes wide, and said, "If you had been obedient from the start, things wouldn't have ended up like this." As soon as those words left his lips, everything inside me went cold. That was the moment Hung laid bare the darkest part of his heart. He blamed his mother for fueling his greed. He blamed me for refusing to be his obedient sacrifice. He blamed everyone, except himself. And for someone who shifts blame like that, there is no saving them. Mrs. Twee trembled, and suddenly, something inside her seemed to snap. She stood up, no longer crying or pleading, no longer begging me to save her son. She rushed forward and slapped Hung repeatedly, crying between hits, her voice broken. "What kind of person have I birthed? Do you want to drag the whole family down with you to be satisfied? Are you even human anymore, Hung?" The sharp sound of slaps echoed repeatedly through the living room. If it were before, Hung might have kept quiet out of lingering respect for his mother. But tonight, he was no longer the son pretending to be filial. He shoved her hands away violently. Everything happened in a single beat. Mrs. Twee stumbled back, her hip hitting the edge of the glass table before she collapsed. The dry thud of the impact made me jump. Instinctively, I rushed over to catch her. No matter how much I hated her, I couldn't just stand by and watch someone fall like that in front of me. At the same time, Dewey stepped forward, grabbed Hung by the collar, and jerked him toward him. I had never seen my brother's eyes look so sharp and fierce. It wasn't just the coldness of a composed man anymore. It was the true bloodlust of a man who had seen his sister cornered, and now watched this guy push his own mother. He growled each word, low and chilling. "Who did you just push?" Hung was both frantic and terrified, trying to break free. But right then, the security guard accompanying us rushed in and held Dai's arm back. I understood very well that if I had been just a beat slower, Hung would have been beaten up right in the middle of the room tonight, leaving nothing left to say. Mr. Fuck then finally spoke, his voice not loud but as hard as nails. "An embezzler who forces his wife and assaults his own mother. Do you think the company or the law would just let you stand there?" That statement hit Hung like a bucket of ice water to the face. His madness subsided so quickly I could see it clearly. Only seconds ago, he was roaring like a wild animal, yet as soon as the law and having nowhere to hide were mentioned, his entire aggressive facade collapsed, revealing the true coward inside. He stood frozen, eyes darting around the room like a cornered rat, then suddenly collapsed to his knees in the middle of the floor. Before anyone could react, Hung crawled all the way to me. That crawling posture was truly humiliating. There was no trace left of the husband who once barked orders, nor any shred of masculine dignity. He grabbed the hem of my dress, weeping as if playing the victim enough would make me soften. "Thou, I beg you, it was just a slip-up. I know I was wrong. Please withdraw the complaint. Put in a good word for me with Dewey and Mr. Fuck. I'll do anything you want, I'll do it all." I stood still looking down at the man who had once shared my bed, eaten from the same table, and whom I had trusted so much that I left no way out for myself. Now that he was kneeling at my feet like that, strangely, I no longer felt the anger rising, nor the urge to get to the bottom of things or rub salt into his past words. In my heart, there was only a sense of weary, repulsive, and utter emptiness. I pulled the hem of my dress from his hands. I looked down at his disheveled face and replied, very short and very cold. "I don't need you to do anything anymore. I just need my life to have nothing to do with you from now on." As soon as those words fell, I knew that between Hung and me, it was truly over. There wasn't a shred of pity left to hold on to. That was the final cut, clean, cold, and with no turning back. Behind me, Bao Tui was still sitting on the floor, holding her hip, her face drenched in tears. But this time when she looked up at me, her eyes were different, no longer filled with that blind plea to save her son. She looked at me with genuine pain, like someone just waking up from a long, lingering dream. She choked out the words, "You were right, he isn't worth saving." I didn't answer. Because I knew she hadn't become a good person overnight. Someone who once humiliated their daughter-in-law couldn't suddenly turn kind just because her son betrayed her. But at least now she was lucid enough to face the painful truth. The child she doted on and fueled with ambition was the root cause of everything falling apart. And right at that moment, the sound of a car braking sharply rang out at the gate. I looked up, and immediately heard car doors opening, hurried footsteps, and then two uniformed figures quickly advancing into the yard. Just by seeing them, I knew the legal climax had finally arrived. The two uniformed officers entered the living room, no noise, no shouting. They simply presented their documents and spoke in a clear, steady voice, but it was enough to make the air in the house drop instantly. "We are asking Mr. Van Hung to come in for questioning to verify some matters related to allegations of coercion, conspiracy for profit, and signs of asset misappropriation." No more screaming, no more arguing. The whole house plunged into a strange silence, so silent that I could clearly hear Hung's rapid breathing right behind my back. He took a step back, then another, his eyes darting around as if he couldn't believe this was real. His voice stuttered, pathetically weak. "No, you can't be arresting me. I haven't done anything to that extent." An officer looked at him, his gaze not harsh, but absolutely leaving no room for denial. "You have not been charged yet, but you must come with us." That sentence was like the final period. Mrs. Twee burst into tears, but this time she didn't rush out to hold him back, didn't scream to stop them like other mothers I'd seen. She just slumped into her chair, hands clutching her chest, her empty eyes fixed on her son. Perhaps by now, she understands it better than anyone. This is no longer a matter that can be settled behind closed doors. This is the price that must be paid. Hung turned his head. This time he didn't look at his mother, Mr. Fuck, or even dare to look at Dewey. He looked at me. That look was no longer aggressive, nor was it feigned regret. It was like a drowning man suddenly catching sight of a final straw. Thou, his voice was hoarse. Please, say something to help me. I stood still. Perhaps if it were the me of a few years ago, I would have softened. I would think of the days we loved each other, the meals we shared, the bond of husband and wife. But after everything that just happened, I understand one thing very clearly. If I open my mouth to save him now, I'm not saving a person. I'm pulling myself back into the hole I just escaped. I looked at him, my voice so calm that even I was surprised. I was your wife, not a shield for your crimes. He went numb. No one said anything else. 2 officers stepped forward, requesting him to come along. Hung walked with a weary gait, his legs seeming to have no strength left. At the door, he turned back one last time, but it wasn't to beg, just an empty look. As if he himself couldn't understand why everything ended up this way. The gate opened, the red and blue lights from the vehicle outside flashed across the courtyard. A 20 billion dream that once made him arrogant, and made this whole family dream of a new life, ended with that exact cold light. Right after that, Mr. Fuck's phone rang. He answered, saying only a few very brief words. When he hung up, he didn't look at anyone, only saying enough to close the rest of the story. Din Tuan has been suspended, and the entire file has been transferred to legal authorities. I am not surprised. People like him, used to standing above others, often think they will never fall. But in reality, one slip is all it takes for them to fall faster than anyone else. It's not because I did anything terrible, but because he was accustomed to treating others as things to be trampled upon. When everyone left, the house suddenly felt strangely spacious, with no more arguing, no more crying, only an icy emptiness creeping into every corner. Mrs. Twee sat there for a long time. I said nothing, nor did I approach. I just stood there watching the woman who had hurt me countless times, now curled up like a shadow. A while later, she spoke, her voice raspy. I was wrong from the start. I just thought as long as my son was rich, everything would be fine. I did not answer. There are mistakes that one sentence cannot fix, and there are lessons that must be paid for personally to be remembered. I did not need to say anything more. I pulled my small suitcase from the corner to the middle of the room. The divorce papers were still lying there. On the table, exactly where I had placed them, I picked them up, smoothed them out, and set them back down in front of her. I'm leaving, I said in a calm tone. Whatever happens to this house from now on, it no longer has anything to do with me. Quote. Mrs. Twee looked up, her eyes red, but she didn't hold me back, didn't beg, didn't reproach me. She only bowed her head very low, her voice so quiet I barely heard it. I'm sorry, she whispered, and I stood still for a few seconds. Not all apologies come at the right time, but at least this one was sincere. I didn't say I forgave her, nor did I turn away coldly. I just gave a slight nod. A very light nod, enough to close the chapter, not to go back. I pulled my suitcase and walked out the door that I once thought would be where I spent my whole life. Outside, Dewey was still waiting. He didn't ask if I was okay, didn't ask if I wanted to go back. He just opened the car door like when we were little. Every time I was bullied, he would be there waiting for me to come home. I sat down and leaned my head back. Only now did my whole body begin to collapse. I was tired, not from the argument, but from finally being able to let go. Dewey looked at me through the rearview mirror, his voice deep, warm, and firm. It's over, from now on, no one can sell you out again. I turned my face to look outside. It was almost morning, and a very faint streak of sunlight began to filter through the row of houses opposite. That light isn't brilliant, but it is enough for me to clearly see the path ahead. It might not be easy, and I may still have to learn how to stand on my own. But at least from this moment on, I know I am no longer a commodity in anyone's hands. Some women spend many years before realizing that the tragedy isn't marrying the wrong man, but remaining silent for too long in the face of what is wrong. As for me, the night I was traded for a 20 billion contract was the same night I stopped being a commodity in others' eyes to become a human being in my own life once again.